It's been called the Great Resignation as people retire early or just walk away from their jobs.
And here in Maine, we're not immune. Take a look at this graph. For 15 years, Maine saw a slow and steady decline in the percentage of people in the workforce, about 4% during that period. Then the pandemic hit, and it forced a lot of people out of employment. Most were forced out, but some left by choice. While there are many reasons for workers to leave, including health and safety, there seems to be something larger at the core.
A Harvard study surveyed full-time employees in 8 different countries, including the U.S., and found that 58% of employees would trust a total stranger over their boss. That's in part what inspired author Dara Barlin to do more research.
What we're seeing is that respect is actually at the core. It's the missing ingredient, and it kind of makes sense, right? So when people go to work and they feel unappreciated, and then they feel undervalued, when they feel disrespected, then low salary becomes the issue. Then nightmare logistics to find childcare becomes the issue. Then they want to retire early, right? So all of these things have manifested in the pandemic at a much higher level, right? The logistics are getting harder. And so those low level salaries just don't seem worth the trade-off anymore.
Barlin has been working with government agencies for about 5 years in gathering research on work cultures, what works and what doesn't. She's collected that research in a book called A New Kind of Power. So what can companies and bosses do to combat the labor shortage and create spaces that people actually want to work in?
When you have structures for deep listening of employees, when you have structures that actually honor that they have a voice in decisions that affect them, then there's a lot of goodwill and morale and support and excitement that employees bring to the organization. I'll give you one example of what that looks like. Having a meeting about a policy that an organization wants to put in place. A lot of times those meetings happen among senior level leaders. So you would bring in the voices of frontline workers, middle managers into the policies that affect them. The interesting thing, though, is it's kind of a faux pas to do that in today's environment, right? Senior leaders just want to meet with other senior leaders. When those meetings are happening, there's a lot of resentment that comes out of that, lack of transparency, low trust. People feel they don't understand what's going on, so rumors start and gossip starts and conflict starts. And all of that is because of this role-alike meeting or level-alike meetings that happen.
I think one thing we've seen through this pandemic that's now almost 2 years long is that, mental health has it's been pushed a little bit more to the forefront in conversations, which is a good thing. But how does a company make a psychologically safe environment for their employees who may be struggling?
I'm so glad you used that term. So the term psychological safety came from a Harvard professor from Harvard Business School named a wonderful researcher named Amy Edmondson. And she coined the term because she kept seeing it over and over and over again in organizations because it wasn't happening. And psychological safety means that people feel safe to admit when they make mistakes, and to speak their truth when they see things happening that aren't great. Unfortunately, in most spaces, there isn't that sense of psychological safety. So a lot of employees, they bite their tongue, mistakes get swept under the rug, and the organization suffers, and employees are walking around on eggshells and are scared to come to work.
So that said, how do you sort of foster an environment where there is equity and there is inclusion and there is that safety?
You need a plan. And so the plan is, okay, let's have the foresight to say, when somebody makes a mistake, how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to support them in learning from that mistake? How are we going to support the team in making sure that mistake doesn't happen again? And that way you're focusing on solving the problem and not on blaming or shaming the person who made the mistake. And that's where there's real possibility there.
I want to move on to this because this is actually the first time I've really heard much about EQ, which is emotional intelligence quotient. And some studies have shown that that's almost more important in a person than IQ is. First off, what is that and why is that so important?
Yeah, so EQ is the sexy new term for emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. And you're right, about 71% of recruitment managers now say that they value EQ over IQ and even technical skills. And that's because of what a lot of the folks are saying is, yes, technical skills and intelligence, very, very important parts of the job, of course, but that's the lowest threshold to be able to get promoted into a senior leadership position. You really need emotional intelligence, people who know how to give employees choice and voice, how to create psychological safety, how to make employees feel empowered so that they want to come to work, so that they want to stay at work, right? That's how we solve a lot of these labor shortages.
You can learn more about Dara Barlin's book and her research on our website or our News Center Maine app.